Welcome to the podcast Above the Cloud, Stories from the Boardroom. In every episode, we interview business leaders who are navigating the complex world of B2B marketing. Whether you're trying to grow revenue, swoop into a new market, or launch new products, we promise you've landed in the right spot. And now your host, Richard Bird.
I'm your host, Richard Bird, and today we're bringing on Adam Morgan, the Director of Global Communications and Marketing at the Bristow Group. Adam, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're glad to have you on. So this is our first season, and so you're one of the very first guests that we've had on the show, and so we're really happy to have you on board.
It can only go up from here, I guess.
Great. So the big question that we ask people that you're probably not prepared for is, if your company was a bird, what kind of bird would you be?
Wow. Okay. No, that's a good question. On the fly, let's see. So our company, we operate helicopters. So we are already kind of inherently just bird-like, right? But I would say, I had a job in Alaska, at Juneau, Alaska, and there were tons of bald eagles in there. And on my drive home one time, we had to drive by the landfill, and there was always just, 30 to 50 bald eagles sitting over by the landfill picking things out to eat and everything. And one day I was driving by and I saw this bald eagle literally pick up and this is probably going to be a little gross, so a little content warning for our listeners, but pick up a deer carcass and carry it off, right?
Wow.
And I'm not saying that Bristow picks up deer carcasses, but we pick up passengers from one location and take them to another location. So I'm going to say that our spirit animal is the bald eagle.
Wow. Well, that's spoken like a true American, the bald eagle. That is crazy, though. I can imagine seeing an eagle pick up a deer carcass. That is that's a chunk, especially in Alaska. They're not like in Texas where we have these little white-tailed deer. They've got some big deer up there.
Oh, it's a testament to their strength. Another thing that Bristow has.
All right, very cool. Adam, you've had a long career and you've done a lot of stuff in your career. And I know when you were a little kid sitting in elementary school, you weren't sitting there going, I want to work as a marketing guy for a helicopter company. How'd you get on this path? And tell us a little bit about your background and how you got here.
Great question. Let's see. Where do I start? I guess I was born a baby. Then when I was 3, no, I won't take you through all of it. No. Actually, it's interesting. I was just having this conversation with somebody the other day, and we were talking about how'd you get in your career, blah, blah, blah. And I said, it's interesting. I was in the military. I got out of the military, and actually, at that point, I still had no intention of going to college and working in an office setting. My big master plan in life was to get some blue-collar type job, use my VA loan, buy a house, work some construction site job, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, whatever, come home, sit in my Easy Boy recliner and watch Sports Center and do it all again the next day. And that's actually what I started to do when I first got out of the military. And then I realized, well, gosh, I just don't want to do this for the next 40 years. And so then I went and signed up at college and used my GI Bill to pay for college. In college, I actually started as a business major with a focus on HR. And so as part of the business major program at Portland State University, which is where I got my undergrad, you have to take public speaking. All business majors have to take a public speaking class. And I took the public speaking class, and uniquely to me, unlike most people, I absolutely loved it. I loved public speaking. I loved being up in front of everybody, all eyes on me, give me all the attention, let me talk to people for an hour or whatever. And that's when I realized that there was this whole degree program for communications and marketing at the university. And I quickly switched majors, got into communications, and, the rest is kind of history. But, right out of college, I worked at the USDA Forest Service. I worked in Alaska and Kentucky doing public affairs. For a short bit, I thought I was going to do legislative affairs. I love tracking policy, responding to congressional inquiries, going to Washington, D.C. on Hill visits and briefing our congressionals on how we were spending the funding that they were giving us, et cetera, and thought that was going to be a great career for me. Moved up to Alaska, which is where my daughter was born. And at that point, Alaska just seemed so far away from everybody. So I was looking to get back down into the lower 48, and that's when I got a job at Boeing. I spent about 10 years at the Boeing company. It was a phenomenal career. Worked on their commercial airplane side, worked on their space side, worked in their international sales communications. So I covered Latin America, Africa, and the Caribbean. A lot of great travel opportunities in that job. Back to Houston for their space business. I spent about 10 years there, then decided, hey, I think it's time for a change. I'm living in Houston. Oil and gas, as we all know, here in the Houston area is a big industry for Houston. Decided that I was going to focus on that industry and got a job at GE Oil and Gas, doing commercial communications for their sales team. So that's where I learned a little bit about marketing, or a little bit about marketing. And then from there, I got a job at McDermott as their global head of communications and marketing, reporting right to the CEO, supporting the management team, had a marketing team, had a communications team. Great job there. McDermott went on to buy CB&I, helped them announce the merger, helped them start the integration. And then a recruiter reached out to me for the job I'm in now at Bristow, as the director of global communications and marketing. And interestingly enough, when the recruiter first reached out to me, I turned the job down, or turned the opportunity to interview for the job down, because I was like, McDermott's a much smaller company than any company I've ever worked for. Wasn't sure how I felt about that. A much smaller team than I have had in the past. Wasn't sure how I felt about that. But then I just started looking at McDermott online, at Bristow online, and studying the company and what they do. And it was just a really interesting company, and I just couldn't get it out of my mind. So I reached back out to the recruiter after probably a few weeks, actually, and said, hey, I don't know if you're still looking for somebody for that job, but I'd really like to be considered for this still. And she said, as a matter of fact, we are still looking. And it was just a really nice kind of combination of both my aviation experience and my oil and gas experience coming together under one roof, which was really appealing and exciting to me. And that's kind of how I got to where I am today.
That's awesome. Well, that's interesting, right? Circling back, getting right back into the aerospace business. And like you said, it's a good mixture between since Bristow serves a lot of oil and gas clients, and it's a big part of your business, but you felt at home right away in that role.
Oh, absolutely. Lots of ex-military folks here. Obviously, there's just a passion in aviation. Whenever you work in an aviation industry, it's one of those industries where you just, even if you don't work in it, people pay attention to it. They're just fascinated with aviation. I think aviation, space, and cars are probably the things that people, we have a lot of enthusiasts, if you will, that just kind of follow us and track us. And they might be accountants in completely different industries, but they're like, hey, I like aviation. So I know all the helicopter types and I know all the missions. And
oh, yeah. Well, that when we were kids, they'd have book fairs. And like every book fair, I would always get like some kind of aviation book. It's like the airplanes of World War One. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, that is really cool. And helicopters are about as cool as you can get. Well, I don't know. Space stuff is probably even a little cooler, but helicopters are pretty awesome. Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, that's great. Well, and I liked your story about the, the public speaking class is kind of what drew you to marketing. And I think, I like talking a lot and being in front of people. It's a sure sign of a marketer. I always say I never met a mic I didn't like. So
right, exactly.
Very good. Well, that journey that you took, Boeing's a really interesting company, and they're kind of going through a rough patch right now. But when you were there, that was just a real darling brand. That must have been really exciting place to work when you were working there. What was your favorite role when you were at Boeing?
Yeah, no, every role I had 4 different roles in a 10-year span, and they were all just phenomenal. I learned so much from each role. And I'll say this, Boeing is, in my view, is still a darling brand. They'll get through all of these challenges that they're in, and they'll come out the other side a better, stronger company, like most companies that go through challenges do. And they had some of the best communicators in the world. And they still do have a phenomenal communications team over there. I stay in touch with a lot of folks over there. My first job at Boeing, interestingly, was on the 787 Dreamliner, which was a fascinating program to work at, and an interesting time to work in communications at a company like Boeing that's doing some really big and amazing things, because that aircraft, so every 15 years or so is when Boeing or Airbus or whomever builds a new aircraft. So it doesn't happen all the time, not every day. And so the 787 Dreamliner was the first aircraft designed and built kind of in this new 24-hour news cycle. It's almost like getting built in a bubble. My first week on the job, so coming from up in Juneau, Alaska in the Forest Service, we're talking about forestry management, proactive management, and stuff like that. And then I come down to Boeing. My first week on the job, my phone rang and picked it up. Adam Morgan, Boeing, 787 Dreamliner, Boeing, and it was Matt Lauer's producer, right?
Oh, wow.
And so, up in Alaska, I was dealing with a local, the Juneau Empire was a local paper, the Anchorage Times or whatever. And here I was, first week on the job, picking up the phone. It was Matt Lauer's producer. And they were like, hey, this Matt Lauer's producer, we're really interested in 787 and we want to come and do some stand-ups and we want to pick the 787 Dreamliner as one of the Where in the World is Matt Lauer locations.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, well, we didn't do it that time because it was just a little too early in the development process. There was no airplane yet. We were still just designing it. But we did work with Matt Lauer and did Where in the World is Matt Lauer a few years later when they actually had the airplane built and stuff. And that was an interesting experience. My role in that part of the program was I was assigned to Lester Holt. So I did a lot of work with Lester Holt over about a 4-day span. I was driving him all over Seattle. I'd go home and tell my wife, yeah, Lester Holt was driving around in my car all day. Spent 7 hours with Lester Holt today, taking him here and there and everything. Just an amazing person, great journalist. Really enjoyed that time. But I think my favorite job, well, they were all just super phenomenal. I loved my job when I covered Africa and Latin America. I went to Ethiopia, Kenya, South Africa, Morocco. Been to Chile, Argentina, Mexico, Colombia, Panama, and you meet some amazing people and you get to do a lot of really, really cool things. And you learn a lot along the way. So my international job, I learned a lot about marketing for market entry. So how do you condition a market before you even go in and sell a product? How do you create a customer preference for your market or for your product rather before you even go there and introduce your product? So a lot of cool things, a lot of things that I learned in that whole 10-year.
Oh, man. Well, I can echo that. I was in a job once that I had to travel a lot internationally. And, one of the things that I got to do was I was on one of the first airplane rides for the 787.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I didn't even know I was going to fly it. That's not what it said on my ticket. And then all of a sudden I was on the Dreamliner. And I still remember, I still have this too, by the way. They gave me a deck of cards as part of it, and it's the Boeing Dreamliners on the cards, and there's like a sticker and something else that they gave everybody on that flight. And I was like, whoa, I've read about this and I heard this was coming. I didn't know I was going to get to fly on one, but it was pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, from a marketing perspective now, what should have happened is when you got off that flight, you would say, man, I just feel better after that flight. You may not know why, but the marketing team had all of the great kind of reasons why, because of the composite material, they were able to, increase the humidity because it doesn't corrode. So, that dry skin that you get when you fly, it doesn't happen on the 787. They can pressurize the cabin differently. So like, the pressure and the headaches and the ear pops and everything aren't as frequent. The fatigue that you might get from flying at high altitude like that, they pressurize it to, I believe it was like 6,000 feet, which is basically like walking around Denver or something.
Wow. That is crazy. Yeah. That was great. I don't recall if I felt better. I didn't remember I had the plane.
Oh, you did. You did. You don't remember. You did.
That's awesome. Well, very good. So I guess, now in your role at Bristow, tell me about Bristow. How big of a company is it? I know a little bit about you guys because I used to do a little work for Bristow in a formal life. Tell me about the company.
Yeah, Bristow, we're a global company. We're headquartered right here in Houston, Texas. We have anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000 employees that support the company across the globe. We're in, pretty much any location where they have a large oil and gas or offshore energy presence. So, basically the main thing that we do and how we kind of got started was, we fly oil and gas workers offshore to the energy platforms. Think of it as just kind of like your aviation service for the energy industry. That makes up probably about 60 to 75% of our revenue. And then kind of where we've been growing over the last few years is what we call government services. What that is mostly what we're doing is search and rescue. So we do search and rescue for private industry as well, but where it's growing the most is with governments across the globe. So we are the Coast Guard for the United Kingdom. So all of our aircraft over there is branded like UK Coast Guard, His Majesty's Coast Guard, if you will. We just won the contract to do the aviation for the Coast Guard for Ireland. We do the aviation Coast Guard in the Netherlands, down in the Dutch Caribbean, down in Curacao. So that's another big piece of what we do. And then I think if you look ahead, kind of the exciting futuristic stuff that we're looking at doing is something called advanced air mobility. So think of, the helicopter in itself, the technology behind it really hasn't drastically changed over the years. Advanced air mobility is looking at a new way to power aircraft, so a lot of battery powered aircraft. So that's going to open up a lot of potential new markets, new ways of thinking about flying. So those are kind of our three main areas.
Wow. So that is interesting because, mostly we focus on B2B marketing on this podcast, but that B2G marketing is its own thing, right? I mean, that's its own discipline, and I would imagine there's some tricks to it. Did you have was it difficult to kind of switch your mindset from being a B2B marketer to business to government? What kind of obstacles did that pose to you?
Yeah, I don't think you would. I mean, because at the end of the day, it's all people, right? So whether it's B2C, B2B, B2G, at the end of the day, we're working with people, we're talking to people, we're trying to influence people, if you will. I would say from the government perspective, the thing that you have to think about from that perspective is, these are long-term contracts, right? They're not like 2-year contracts. I think in most of the government contracts we do are 10 years or more, with 5-year options and things like that. So once you land one, it's kind of a coveted piece of business to get one of these government contracts, because you have that contract secured for the next 10 years. It's stable revenue, so our investors like it, that kind of a thing. So but as far as like how you market the business and what we do, obviously our experience in search and rescue, we've been doing search and rescue for quite some time. It's just now that some of these smaller or some of these countries that don't want to carry a lot of overhead expense to have their own aviation arm, there's a lot of benefits to bringing in a company like Bristow to support those missions.
Sure. And I guess from a revenue stream, it's really smart too to you're in a very volatile industry, the oil and gas. So it's nice to have a be able to fall back on some long-term contracts that kind of maybe stabilize the business a little bit.
Exactly.
Are you guys private equity backed? Or are you?
Well, we're a publicly traded company.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Very good.
We trade under the symbol VTOL, VTOL, vertical takeoff and landing.
All right. Well, that's good. That's cool. So I guess, one thing that I always like to ask people about their role is, what is one thing that now that you wish you had done on day one?
At Bristow specifically?
Yeah, Bristow specifically.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. And I know we talked a bit before this, and that was the one question I was like, gosh, I'm trying to think of, I think it's at as you get along in your career, there's not a lot, I think, in my opinion, there's not a lot of surprises left. I think, things happen and you're like, okay, while at the moment you're like, well, I didn't expect that to happen. But the fact that it happened, you're ready for it because you've experienced it or similar to it in your career. I think one of the things what I would say is one of the things I love about Bristow is the people. I didn't expect to build such close relationships with so many people at the company. We're 4,000 employees, but I feel like there's not a lot of employees that I haven't heard their name or met, whether it be in person or over Teams or with an email or whatever. I wasn't expecting for it to feel like such a close knit kind of family. Had I known that going into it, I might have. Yeah, not that I did anything wrong when I first got here, but I think you just would have thought about it differently, treated people differently. I'm not a mean guy or anything like that, so it wasn't like I treated people any certain way. But I think just knowing that it's such a close knit family, going into it, you just kind of you think about things a little bit differently and how things impact other people, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, the 3,000 person company is actually a small company compared to Boeing, right?
Yeah. And I think, from a marketing perspective, just, obviously the more you can learn about a company before you get there is key. But, there's certain things that you just can't find out learn on the internet or whatever. So just knowing how broad our services are, how the system works, what we do, how we engage with our customers, et cetera, all of that going in on day one would have obviously made day one and day 30 and 45 a lot easier.
Sure. Yeah. Part of our offering here at Bluebird is that we're fractional CMOs. So we start new jobs all the time, and you go in and you learn these companies. It's kind of like what you said, where there's a lot of things that are the same, but every company has its own nuances, and even with just within the discipline of marketing too, right? And so you get in there and you're like, oh wow, and we've worked with companies that you would think that they're about the same size company in the same industry and all these things that are going to be pretty similar, but they are all nuanced, and the cultures can be very different.
Absolutely. And, I think you bring up a good point because, one of the things I learned quickly at Bristow is, the helicopter industry for supporting the energy, the helicopter piece of the energy industry is pretty, we've been around for a while, but it's also like we're still growing up in a way, right? We're still maturing. Because if you think about how this all started, it was a very kind of mom and pop shop type of an industry in its very, very early days. From a marketing perspective, there's still a lot of that relationship-based, face-to-face type marketing, right? So, I don't expect that our customers are really finding us, on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. I mean, I think they follow us on like LinkedIn and they enjoy the content that we put out, but I don't know that we're necessarily winning new business. Maybe we're satisfying existing business and highlighting our capabilities, et cetera. But, I don't think that that's a marketing tactic per se to get new clients, for instance.
Yeah. Well, it's a good thing since TikTok might be going away. So
yeah, we ended up, I have a friend here at the office that is constantly joking about, hey, when are we getting our TikTok page? I said, I don't know. I don't think the TikTok's where it's at for us. But,
yeah, I don't think your audience is hanging out there. I don't think there's many, Scottish Coast Guard people that are going, yeah, let's hire our next search and rescue company based off of TikTok.
But, we would, I'm sure we could come up with some pretty good TikTok content. But again, it's just, at that point, it's just content for the sake of content, right?
Yeah. I think one of the things that we've found in our discussions with our guests is that, going back to that, every company is a little different and there's nuance to different industries and all that. What would you say from a marketing perspective, that is, what are the biggest obstacles your industry faces?
Yeah, I would say for us, I think that one of our biggest challenges is to avoid being commoditized, right? You have to avoid this whole, it's all about price. It's all about price. It's all about price. It's all about price. When I first started here talking with the sales guy, like, hey, what do the customers care about? What makes them tick, right? And it was, well, safety. Number one, got to be safe. It's the price of admissions, right? If you're not a safe company, you're not going to do well in this industry. But then after that, it's cost, But we have to avoid going into this low cost, kind of race to the bottom, if you will, win at any means. There's a value that gets placed, there should be a value placed on what we do and how we do it. And so, those are a lot of the conversations I have now with our BD folks and our country heads. And that is what is the value that we bring to our customers? It can't be just about cost. It has to be a way for us to showcase our value that we bring, our assured service, our safety record. It's great if you're a low cost, but if you're not getting somebody from point A to point B regularly on time, what's the cost of those delays? And is it worth the low cost at the onset just to have to go back and spend more later to remedy it? So, for me, it's avoiding being commoditized and changing the conversation to value.
Yeah, well, and we see that a lot with our clients as well. That especially and you serve the oil and gas industry a lot, and they have very strong procurement teams, and they're very good at commoditizing. But I think the procurement guys are not the ones that have to get on the helicopter and go offshore. Speaking to somebody who worked for an oil field services company for a while, I knew a guy there, and he was involved in 2 helicopter crashes, and neither one with Bristow. I'll just say, but what he said, he was on one flight, and they were coming back from offshore, and they were flying low, and he saw that there were the big trees ahead, and he thought, I feel like we're flying a little low. He's like, I'm sure this guy's got it covered. This is in West Africa. And so he just flying. He's like, no, I feel like we're low. And they actually crashed into the tree canopy, and they got stuck in one of the trees.
Oh my gosh. I haven't heard that one.
I was like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. But yeah, he survived. He was the only person I've known who's been in a helicopter crash. He was in 2 helicopter crashes and he survived both of them. So
Yeah. Well, and you brought up, the procurement side of the business as well. What we do, the logistics, the people logistics of it's an extremely important piece of the value chain, right? You have to get your people offshore, but at the same token, it's a fairly small piece for the large oil and gas companies, right? I mean,
Sure.
they're spending billions on this, that, and the other thing. We're a small kind of a contract for them to sign. So I think it's easy for a procurement person to be like, oh, we're just signing this small contract with, some logistics company, right? But, I think, we have to make sure that we're more than that to them,
Sure.
that we are a trusted partner. We are I think we're a solutions provider more than a service provider, so, come to us with your transportation needs and we'll come up with a solution that best meets those needs based off of our breadth and depth of experience in this business.
Yeah, and that's a big differentiator for you guys, I would imagine, over a mom and pop that just, servicing 2 or 3 helicopters and, you hope that they're maintaining them properly and get them out there offshore. But, one of the things too, in offshore oil and gas, if there ever was an industry where time is money, it's that one, right? So if you're on a $1 million a day spread rig and the helicopter doesn't bring the main engineer that's going to run the job or the driller or whoever else, it's really going to hurt them. It's going to hurt them in the wallet.
Yeah. And, obviously there's other ways to get out there. They can take boats, and there's a whole business and industry trying to come up with faster boats and stuff. But, those things can be limited on, weather, high seas, et cetera. And they'll never be as fast as a helicopter transport. So,
that's very good. Well, I guess, I think other than highlighting your differentiation, what else are you working on to prevent yourselves from being or commoditized?
yeah, again, I think it's just, highlighting the value that we bring, talking about our, we at Bristow, I was in the military, I've worked at Boeing, I've worked at a lot of other companies. And I think Bristow is, of all the companies, the one that truly has this kind of safety first mindset. I mean, and we talk about that's the price of emissions because it is, but I think there's companies and people here that just kind of take it to the next level from the very first day I stepped in the office. I mean, safety was, I think I got a safety brief from the receptionist that welcomed me on my first day to, and then one of the first meetings I had was with the safety officer, and they gave me a safety brief. So, we do talk about it because we do place an extreme importance. We say it's our highest operational priority is safety, and we have a whole thing we call our Target Zero safety culture. We're in the midst of a video campaign right now where we talk about how, it's one thing for a company to say that safety is first, but if people don't believe in it, or if they don't have a reason to want to be safe, it doesn't matter how many posters we put on the wall or how many messages we send out. If they don't have their own personal reason of why they want to be safe and look out for their coworkers or themselves even, then it's not going to be taken as seriously. So right now we're highlighting the personal side of safety. So what is your why? What's the reason for you to come into work today and work as safe as you can? And really, we're finding out, a lot of people share the same reason why. I want to go home and see my family at the end of the day. I want to make sure that my coworkers can go home and see their families at the end of the day. And so we're tapping into that why for safety. So, and I'm really impressed with this whole video campaign. You can go to our website or our LinkedIn page and see a lot of those. We call them video vignettes. So those are some of the things on how we talk about, because that's a safety culture that we've built over time. So that's kind of our intellectual property of our people and the culture that we're building here. And so I think those are some of the ways that you prevent from being commoditized.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting when you talk about a safety culture, because, you can really tell a company that has one, because like you said, the receptionist is, telling you where the muster point is and, all those kinds of things. But, it's like what John Wooden said, how you do anything is how you do everything. So if it's not going all the way through the permitting throughout the entire company, then you don't have a safety culture. You have some people who might be acting safely, but not. I really would love to see those videos. That sounds exciting. I guess, one of the things too that I think about is, you have the safety videos and highlighting your culture, and that's a really interesting marketing tactic because it's not marketing that you have a safety culture, but reflecting that safety culture to your audience is definitely a really smart and strong marketing tactic that helps differentiate you. What are some marketing tactics that you've tried in the past that didn't work?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would say, I don't have a great answer for this because I like to think that, we're pretty measured in our approach to things. We don't just jump into things without a lot of thought. But what I will say, it's not necessarily a tactic, but one marketing misstep, if you will, was more about strategy. And so I'll use this example. When the Irish Coast Guard contract was being bid, right? So, the tender's out, et cetera. There was an opportunity for us to really build a brand in country, right? And let the people of Ireland get to know who Bristow is, our values, the history of the company, how we became, that kind of a thing. And we missed it. I'll admit it, we missed it. We just didn't, and that's my fault. As the head of communications and marketing, I didn't push hard enough to really get us in there early to talk about it. And there's lots of reasons, right? I think, maybe there was some superstition, like, hey, if we go in there and make a big deal about this, we're going to, we're superstitious and we may not get the contract or whatever. But and the reason why I think it was a miss is what it did to us is after we won the contract, some of our competitors in country used that vacuum as an opportunity to kind of undermine the decision to go with us. And, we got through it and everything, but it caused us, we had to spend some time on kind of a brand building exercise in country to introduce ourselves to the communities in which we're going to, because, we're saving lives offshore. These are just community people that, are having their holiday on the coast or whatever. And maybe they fell while they were rock climbing, or maybe they got lost in a forest, or, the dinghy that they were on got pulled out to sea a little bit farther, and now they're, kind of lost at sea or whatever. So these are the community people that need to trust in who's coming to rescue them. And they didn't know us, they didn't know who Bristow was, and they didn't know our legacy in search and rescue and our history. So it's just a missed opportunity. And that's a big lesson learned for me and for us, I think, is that, there's an opportunity to really go in and build a brand and build some brand recognition well before you even have work in country.
Yeah, that's interesting point too, because I think especially when you're in a tender process, it's very easy to get sucked into just responding to the questions that are in the tender, right? And you can make it so transactional. But at the end of the day, it's like you said, it's not about winning or answering questions on the tender. It's about connecting with humans, and especially if it's a community. Just out of curiosity, what were the competitors saying? Like, these guys aren't from around here, kind of approach?
Well, I'm not going to get into competitor bashing or anything like that. But what I'll say is, we had a different approach, a different solution than the competitor was offering, or what had been used in the past. And so they were calling into question whether or not that was the right solution. And so that was just a challenge. We have some of the most technologically advanced aircraft, some of the best pilots. So, I feel like we've since then have gone out and addressed and built that trust amongst the community. The customer, I think is extremely happy with our solution. So
that's cool. Do you have any cool search and rescue stories? I think those can be super interesting. This takes us apart from marketing, but who knows? It's a good marketing case study, maybe.
Oh yeah, I don't personally, because but I know I talk to our SAR pilots, regularly. And there's some amazing people that, they truly are, heroes. They save lives every day. They save lives. We do an internal podcast, and I host that internal podcast. And we had a pilot, or not a pilot, but a rescueman on the podcast who had won an award recently for, this was probably about a year ago, that he won the award for a rescue that he did probably a year prior. So, but basically, they got called out onto this rescue. I think it was like a broken ankle or twisted ankle or something like that, one individual. And the weather conditions were deteriorating. So they went out, they flew out expecting to pick up one person off the side of a mountain who had fallen down and twisted an ankle or whatever it was. Yeah. And when they got there, the weather had deteriorated so much that it became basically a party rescue. This rescueman had to rescue an entire party of
Oh,
people, and it's a phenomenal story that he tells. I think we have a written version of his story on our website. I think we've done some social media about it. But you can, if you want take the time to go back and look on our website under our feature stories and find that one. But it's a really fascinating story to hear this guy tell it, from first person of all of the challenges that he's faced. He's out there by himself. Nobody else has the kind of experience that he has to be able to rescue people off the side of the mountain, but he was kind of enlisting some of the other people in the hiking party to kind of help him. And, how do you keep people motivated? I mean, at certain points in time, he talks about how some people look like they just wanted to give up and they accepted their fate. But they got everybody off the mountain. It's a fascinating story.
wow, that is crazy. I can only imagine. I've done. I lived in Colorado for a summer, and I did a lot of hiking in the mountains and stuff. And the weather can really turn on you fast. And it's no joke when you're standing above the tree line and you're like 13,000 feet and a thunderstorm moves in. You are the highest object. There's
and
no
it moves in quick, and like you said, it changes so rapidly.
Yeah, I can imagine having to fly a helicopter in that environment too. And
Yeah.
was it the thing where they drop down the ladder, or they have to drop down the
Yeah, they're on a wire, but because they're pretty high up there, but
wow, man.
So he has to get winched down, and then he assesses the situation and realizes, wow, there's a lot more to be done here than just pulling one person off the mountain. So,
Wow, man, that's exciting. That's interesting work. I guess, thinking back in your career, what would you say is the most important lesson you've learned in marketing?
yeah, I would say, and this is just basic stuff, right?
Sure.
I mean, just know your audience, know your customer, know your client, know what they expect. I mean, I think there's real value in personas, right? Create that, spend the time to create the persona early on, the buying personalities, etc. So I think, just stopping for a moment and really spending time, because I think we can all get wrapped up in the day to day. Just put out the fire, create the deliverable. I think it's extremely important to pull ourselves above the fold for a moment, assess the situation, and really put some strategy behind it. Because we can all get wrapped up in the tactics, and of course, our executives love the tactics. That's what they want to see. That's what they want to hear about. I'm sure you've done this. You go into the meeting with the executive to pitch your marketing plan, and you spend all this time putting it together, and you've got your strategy and your audience, your personas, and they're just like kind of giving you that kind of hurry up. So then you just get to the tactics, and that's what they want to hear. But the tactics are nothing without the strategy, right? So
Yeah.
I just say, pause for a moment, spend the time, focus on the strategy, understand the audience and the personas and the behaviors, and then I think that will only help with your tactical implementation.
Oh yeah, that is such great advice. We always tell our clients right at the beginning that marketing is simple, but it's not always easy. And it's, who are you talking to? What keeps them up at night? And how do you solve that problem better than anyone else in the world? And until you know the answers to those questions by heart and you feel very confident in it, you shouldn't spend one penny on tactics.
Yeah. And it's easy for you to think you know what they want, right? Because,
Oh yeah.
I think that's the biggest misstep from a sales or marketing perspective is going in and telling them what they want, right? You need to understand the issues, the pain points, and how what you have can provide a solution to make their lives easier.
Oh, for sure. When we're working with clients, a lot of times they don't call us in because everything was going great before we got there. And so we come in and we've seen some things and they're like, wow, now that we know who your audience is and what your competitors are saying, what we have been saying in the past in your marketing is something that's going to not only not help you, but it's going to alienate you. It's going to really rub people wrong, that you're trying to sell to. And you want to hear that before you've spent, half of your $1 million marketing budget.
Right, exactly.
It's not news they want to hear, but a lot of times, but it's news they should hear before they start spending money, for sure. I guess what would you say is one of the biggest misconceptions about your industry at Bristow?
I mean, probably like most misconceptions, right? Like it's just easy, right? I think people, you don't. Most people don't get credit for the complexity of what it is that they actually do. Oh, you're just flying people to offshore platforms. I mean, there's a lot more that goes into it. I mean, there's an entire ground operation that has to take place. There's a whole group of people behind every flight to make it happen. It's not, we don't just have a pilot that shows up, gets in a helicopter and flies somebody offshore, So, it's super complex. About Bristow, I think people don't recognize the breadth of what we do. People look at, I think if most people know us for our offshore energy services and flying people to the platforms. A lot of people don't know about our government services and the search and rescue work that we do. So I think just educating people about, all of the different things that we do.
Yeah, that's great. I think about that too with the, especially anything aerospace to me. I think, how many times for myself, even speaking for myself, like you get on an airplane and, you complain about everything. The food sucked, or we were 5 minutes late, or why did we have to wait so long before we pushed off of the, from the gate, to all those things. But if you think about what a complex and hard business airline industry is, I mean, I can't imagine a tougher industry than commercial flight. They've got vendor problems, they got personnel issues, they've got crazy competition. Their vendors have a lot of power over them. I mean, Boeing has a lot of power over its customers, right? I mean, you just look at it and you go, that would be one industry that I would never start a business in.
Two things I'll say, for the airline industry, what the Uniteds and the Americans of the airlines of the world, it is tough, right? Because I think the magic of flight has really kind of eroded, right? Or not that the magic of flight has not eroded. I mean, it's still magical that you get to fly from New York to LA in a matter of hours. But just it's become a bit routine. So that's one is that absolutely has become commoditized. And you look at the different things that the airlines are doing to try to differentiate. But I think I would say a lot of passengers are just looking at price. What's the cost of the ticket for me to get here or there? They don't pay attention. There's few people that pay attention to what aircraft they're on. The different uniqueness of what they're doing, and that's unfortunate because I think flying is still just a magical thing that we're able to do. You mentioned from the Boeing perspective and just the complexities of building a new aircraft or any aircraft, really, right? So when I was there, I remember one of the things that I had to do was write with the 787 Dreamliner early in my career there was write a story about the wings and how the wings were it was a different approach to how you design and build the wings. And what was so fascinating, I had no idea, like each new airplane program has, 10,000 engineers working on it. I mean, it's just a massive undertaking. And so there's like 1,000 engineers just focused on a wing, engineering and designing the wing. And then within the wing, there's a wing tip team that, you've got like 50 engineers just looking at this, 4x3, however big the wing tip is, there's like 50 engineers just focused on that wing tip. It's like, I don't think people understand what all, like just what a massive undertaking, how complex that those machines actually are.
Yeah, no kidding. And everything that goes into it, the material science, like, I mean, it's crazy, how much details involved in it. And then you go, wow, I can fly from Houston to New York in, was it 4 hours, and it cost me, under, $150. Like, that's amazing.
Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah. Yeah. Some of the smartest people I ever met were just in the aerospace industry.
Yeah. Well, what do you think are going to be the biggest trends that are going to affect the aerospace industry, and more specifically, I guess, it could be the whole aerospace, but in Bristow specifically over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I think it's good. It's going to be an exciting, probably more on the 10-year outlook, more so than maybe the 5-year. I mentioned this advanced air mobility, kind of a futuristic or a future piece of vertical flight. So this is AAM, advanced air mobility. So these are like battery powered or different types of fuel sources to get them going. They, they're quieter, they're smaller. But that's an industry that's going to grow, and we're an early adopter in that industry. We're partnering with some of the aircraft manufacturers that are designing and building those aircraft, but that's going to take some time, and it's going to take some time to develop. Our view is, this kind of what does our executives say? Crawl, walk, run kind of approach, right? So, how do you prove out this whole new industry? We're going to have to gain public trust because, they don't look like your traditional helicopters. They don't feel like your traditional helicopters. So you've got to build that trust. We think that's going to happen through some type of cargo flights, et cetera, that will grow into more people. I think if you think back to early airplanes and early aviation industry, we didn't go from the Wright brothers taking flight and then immediately putting, 100 passengers on an aircraft, right? They started delivering the mail, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of our approach to this advanced air mobility. So that's one thing that I'm looking forward to doing at the company and telling that story and our role in that industry. From an energy perspective, I think energy is that the energy needs of the world are here for a long, long time. I think the energy transition is real, but I think it's going to take a lot of time. So I think we'll be, a big player in the offshore energy industry for a long, long time. For me, when I think about it, I do know like technology plays a big role in everybody's lives. That's the same for a lot of the offshore energy companies. So, I think we'll see fewer and fewer people being needed offshore on the platforms. A lot of that will probably get automated. So, how does that impact us at Bristow, and how do we fill that chunk of the pie that we're getting our revenue from now? If fewer people are going offshore, that means likely fewer flights for us. So we'll have to replace that revenue with something else. So I think it's going to be an exciting time, over the next 5 to 10 years. I think 5 years from now, things will probably be fairly similar to what they are today. But I think over the 10 years, you'll probably see a lot bigger changes.
Yeah, man, that idea of having a, pilotless helicopter, if you can say helicopter, I don't even know if you call those helicopters anymore. That is fascinating to me. It's like, it's almost like the Jetsons is happening.
Right. Yeah. No, I think we'll get there. I think it'll take some time. Obviously I think the first generations of them will still have pilots in them. But, we're thinking, the reason that it gets so exciting is because you significantly lower the operating costs, because you significantly reduce the complexities of the machine with a lot of the electronics that goes into it. And so what that does is it opens up a lot of different ways that you can use them. So think of the, I think, it might start where, like, say you're flying into, JFK in New York and you need to get into the city, and it's a $120, $125 cab ride, and it might take you an hour and a half with traffic, maybe even 2 hours sometimes, for, a little bit more cost. You jump on one of these rooftop to rooftop type helicopters and fly in for 15 minutes, and you pay, even if it's like double the cost, you still, time is money for a lot of these busy executives, et cetera, that need to get to a meeting or whatever. That's a pretty exciting thing. Or think about, within Houston, how bad traffic's gotten, if we can get some vertiports, I guess is what they're called. If you get some vertiports put throughout the energy corridor, for instance, or, if going up to IAH and getting back down to the energy corridor, on one of these helicopters. That's pretty exciting stuff.
Oh man. Yeah, that is super exciting. And when you think about like self-driving cars, and, we worked with a client that was in that space, and he said, look, the self-driving cars, that part is not hard. Like the technology's there, but what makes it complex is other drivers. It's other human drivers. That makes the whole thing just really, really hard. And so you think about it from a flight perspective, at least, it's we know air travel is safer than being in a car anyway. So I could see it being very feasible.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I don't have to engineer it, so I'm just the marketing guy.
Yeah, we just get to tell the story.
That's right. So it sounds like you're preparing for those changes already. You're thinking about it. You guys are really forward thinking on how you're going to be involved in that, what the stories you're going to tell, and how you're going to get ahead of that, the great crude chain in the oil field and all those things. So that's really exciting. I guess, from a market, let's go back to a marketing perspective. What kind of emerging marketing trends are you most excited about?
Yeah. Technology, right? I think that this industry is always changing, but also never changing, right? There's the tried and true that I think it's just going to be, it's just good people people skills, building relationships, etc. That part of it's never going to change, but how we create and build that suite of collateral, I think that's where there's going to be some significant changes in the future. I think if you're not thinking about AI or learning about AI, I think you're just going to be behind, right? I think a lot of people in our world are afraid that AI might take their job away or something like that. And I think you can't look at it like that. I think we have to look at it as more of an enhancement or an efficiency tool, right? We just, on my team, we have an internal AI tool that we can use. We just rolled it out recently. We can put into, so we're a global company and we different languages, et cetera. So if somebody in Brazil sends us a document in Portuguese, we could just drop that right into our internal AI tool and say, translate that. You don't have to take it out of the PDF. You just drop the PDF into the tool and say, translate this. Or if we want to send a message out to, our Brazilian population in Portuguese, and we want it to be in the local Portuguese dialect that they want, we can drop, a CEO message, for instance, into this AI tool and say, translate this into, whatever local dialect of Portuguese it will be. And it's pretty good. We've actually done some tests with it and sent it to our local Brazilian folks down there and said, hey, how did it do? And they said, wow, that's really good.
Wow.
There'll be a time where our CEO can have a town hall with the folks in Brazil, and he can speak it in English, and they'll hear it real time in Portuguese. I mean, those are the kinds of things that I think AI are going to really change the game for us and make our jobs a lot better, a lot more efficient, and a lot more effective, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a remarkable tool. And you think about translation, especially. I remember we did these series of posters, and we had to translate them into a bunch of different languages, and we sent it to the French team, and it was like 10 words on this poster. And the French team, there were like 5 French people that were looking at it, and they couldn't agree on the way to say it. It took them like a week, and they were really mad at each other after the fact. So,
yeah, we had a document recently, and I mean, everybody reviewed it, everybody edited it. It was good to go, right? Well, a guy on my team, Robert, he dropped it into the tool and just asked the tool to proofread it, and there was a typo in it. It's like people make mistakes, but AI is not people, right? So it catches, and it was a really obscure typo. It was an I in between like a T and an L or something, like it was missing an I in a word, right? And, the human eye just glances over because it looks right.
Sure.
And you can't really even see, it's not like it was missing the S at the beginning of the word, for someone or something like that, where it would stick out like a sore thumb. This was just an obscure typo, and the tool caught it. It caught it in a matter of seconds. So actually, one of the things we implemented here, actually just this week, is when we write our internal messages, we have an intranet. When we write our intranet stories, the last thing that we're going to do is drop it into the tool and have it proofread it.
We've done something similar to that. We bought Grammarly. This podcast was not sponsored by Grammarly, but it's cool because we have our own brand tone and brand voice that all of our customers are use. And I'm dyslexic, so I've always sucked at spelling. And so these tools have really helped me personally. And, but yeah, like you said, it increases the efficiency of our team, and it helps us to, at the end of the day, put a better product, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's a tough conversation.
I think it's great. I was just messing around in the tool, and I wasn't working on anything specific, but I asked it, I said, create a checklist for an internal employee event with 500 plus employees, with X number of speakers, blah, 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 create a checklist, and it came up, and I was just I already had a checklist, but I wanted to see, like, am I missing anything?
Yeah.
Where are my blind spots? What did I miss? Or what did I not think about? And, I had a lot of stuff on there, but there are a few things I was like, oh, I'll pull that in here, pull that in there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's only going to enhance things. I think we can't be afraid of it. We can't shy away from it. You have to understand it. You have to learn it, because it's going to be and it's always getting better and better.
Yeah. Well, we have one of our clients is involved in that space a lot, and he said, AI is not going to take your job. The guy who knows how to use AI better than you is going to take your job. And I think there's
exactly.
a lot of truth to that.
For sure.
Well, cool. Well, I guess, what advice would you give someone just starting out in marketing?
Gosh, I would just say, I think if you're early in your career, be curious, learn from people around you, learn from the vets. Don't be too eager. I don't think, Richard, you're a veteran in this industry, and when you bring in, some young new employee, recently college grad, I mean, you don't expect them to have all the answers. You don't expect them to solve all the problems. You may give them all the problems, but it's not because you're like, hey, I know you have all the answers. It's like, here's what I want you to work on. If you don't know, ask somebody. I think, it's hard for people to accept the fact that maybe they don't know everything. So, don't be afraid to ask questions. The other thing I would say is spend time getting depth of knowledge, right? If you go to a company, spend some time at the company, understanding the company. We're in a unique position where we have to know all the communications and marketing stuff, but then we also have to know all about our company and how it operates and what makes it tick. So, get depth of knowledge of your company or of your customer or client if you're in the on the agency side, because that's only going to help you with the PR and marketing side of it as well. I used to tell people at Boeing later in my career is, don't chase the money. Spend some time in a job. Don't just be so eager for the next promotion. Sometimes it does worse for your career to get promoted too early and to take on extra responsibility a little bit too early. That can do more damage than good. And you might find yourself having to take a few steps back or tarnish your reputation. So don't just chase the money and look for that next promotion. Those are some of the pieces of advice I've given in the past.
Yeah, no, I think those are all great piece of advice. I think this is such an apprenticeship style industry. I feel like when I graduated from college, I was like, oh, I'm a college educated man now. Like I'm ready to go take the marketing world by storm. And then I got on the job and I was like, oh my God, I don't know anything. Yeah. So yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. Same thing with the I think a lot of times we'll see, as we're hiring people or whatnot, and I'll see on their resume that they've been at a place for a year, and then they moved to here for a year, they moved here for a year, and they were able to, when the economy was great, and they were able to kind of take that next level job. But then I look at it as a future employer, and I'm like, well, they're only going to be here for a year, and that's about how long it's going to take for me to get them up to speed on what we're doing. And so I just don't even look at their resume at that point, right?
Yeah. Well, it's, sometimes they get 4 promotions into it, and you're like, what do they really know at that point? They didn't spend any time in any one place, so I think they might, when it's slow, they pause and be like, wow, I don't really know as much as I should or thought I did.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we're coming up at the end of our time. Any last parting words for our audience?
I would say another piece of advice, I guess would be my parting words, is have fun with it, right? I mean, we work in an amazing marketing and communications. PR is an amazing industry to work in, and it should and it can and should be fun. We do a lot of fun things. It's easy to get burnt out because you're just churning and burning all the time. I think just, try to have fun with it. I mean, at the end of the day, you're going to spend, 8 or more hours a day on the job, working with these people that you work with. Sometimes I see the people at work more than I see my own family. So, I better have fun at work because, I spend a lot of time here. And so I always try to have fun and create a fun environment, let people kind of be creative and have fun with what they're doing.
Yeah, well, I agree. If you can't have fun in the marketing industry, then I can't help you. It's there's always cool projects and, interesting, challenging tasks that you have to do. You always have to learn more, and that's fun. Cool. Well, Adam, hey, thank you so much for joining us, and we really appreciate you being on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. I had a great time. Love to do it again. Let me know.
That's a wrap on today's episode. If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing, sharing, or spreading the news about us on your favorite channel. Thank you for tuning into Above the Clouds, Stories from the Boardroom. Until next time, stay above the clouds.